Hi, everybody. This is going to be take two on this part of the lesson. I recorded it earlier outside, and then the animations didn't play any sound. And that's okay because I'm going to load them up into Chrome this time, and that way I can turn on the closed captions to help some of you. So that's all good. And I'm also going to cut it into two pieces. The other video ended up being 45 minutes long, and was I tired? So I just found out that everything needed to be redone. So here we go. So, lesson one is about the characteristics of the cell, and this part of the lesson is called On the Cellular. And the key components or questions that we're going to be investigating are what parts of this do all cells have in common, and what are the two types of cells? And you might be like, well, it's prokaryote and eukaryote, but alas, it's not. Here we're talking about plant and animal cells. Sometimes the PowerPoint wants me to click, and sometimes it wants me to do the down arrow. Who knows? So, your first question on page 11 is an active reading question, and it wants you, as you read, to underline the functions of the cell membranes, organelles, and DNA. You should know that when I pick up your binders or I look at your actual paper copies of your guided notes, that this is one of the things that I'm most definitely going to be looking for. And so remember that as you do these formatives, you should be answering the questions in your textbook guided notes also. So we're going to start out with what is the role of the cell nucleus? And so you can read all this. This just goes back to, again, to the difference between eukaryote and prokaryotic cells. And that organelles actually mean little organs. And so they're little packages surrounded by a membrane that do some of the cell's work. And they're encased or float around in the cytoplasm. A lot of times, teachers will have kids come up with analogies for the cell and its organelles. So I want you to think about the cell. Oh my goodness. Every time I start these videos, I have to yawn like crazy. Um, so I want you to think of the cell as a factory. And you can see in this picture here, all these little pictures have numbers on them. So as we go through here, I want you to keep this factory in mind, and then you should go back at the end and then write the analogies for what you think each one is in terms of the cell. So what does number 5 represent? What does number 3 represent? And that will help you learn the organelles to come up with an analogy to help you remember their functions. So the nucleus. Prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. And the purpose of the nucleus is to encapture or enclose all of our genetic information. Our DNA is what makes us, you, and grasshoppers. And so I say we, cells that are eukaryotic have come up with an adaptation to enclose all of that nuclear information with a membrane. And this keeps the DNA from floating around in the cytoplasm and getting damaged. It could be damaged by hitting another molecule. It could be damaged by an enzyme or the pH of the cytoplasm. It could get accidentally engulfed by a lysosome. And so it's important that we keep this secret to what makes us, you, and a grasshopper locked up and protected. And that happens in the nucleus. Prokaryotes still have DNA, they still have a chromosome, but it is what's called a circular piece of DNA, meaning that it starts and stops at the same place. If you look into a prokaryotic cell, you're not going to see a perfect circle like a hula hoop. Think of it as a piece of yarn that's tied together, and that tied up yarn makes a loop. But if you wad up all that loop into a ball, it still starts and stops at the same place, but it's a wad of yarn. That's what the DNA is going to look like in a prokaryotic cell. It's not protected by a membrane, and It is in the cytoplasm. They also have other little um, things that are pieces of DNA that are smaller, like plasmids. So just know that prokaryotes have DNA and they do have a chromosome, but it starts and stops in the same spot, and it's quite simple compared to ours, meaning it doesn't have a lot of nucleotides. Our DNA has billions of nucleotides. So here we have these two different types of cells. And so we have the animal cell and the plant cell, and they have distinguished differences. So one of the first differences is, I don't know, should I talk about this now or later? We'll go ahead and talk about it here. One of the big differences is the cell membrane, the cell wall. It's made of cellulose. And when we get to talking about how cells regulate homeostasis, we'll talk about why the plants have this and we don't. Plants also have the cell membrane. All cells have a cell membrane. And so that's why they've cut out this piece here on this plant cell to show you that the cell membrane is lying underneath that cell wall. So the cell wall is like building a fortress around the cell membrane. So in the nucleus, we can actually look at it and it differentiates into areas that look different and have different functions. So in the very center of the nucleus, we have what's called the nucleolus. And in the nucleolus, that's where ribosomes get packaged up and ready for their job, which is to aid in the production of proteins. Outside of the nucleolus is the chromatin. Sorry. And so the chromatin is actually our DNA. So if we think about our DNA as pieces of string or yarn, think of it that as humans, we have 23 different pieces of yarn. So 23 different colors of yarn of different lengths. And so if we took all those 23 colors of yarn and wadded them up, they'd still all be separate strings, but it would be one big mess of yarn. And that's what the chromatin is. It's just one big accumulation of our DNA. When we get to mitosis and meiosis, we'll learn about how the DNA condenses into chromosomes that we can actually visualize with a microscope. So right now, in the chromatin, it's our DNA that's just a whole bunch of gangly strings all meshed up together. The nucleolus, when it makes ribosomes, they can pass out of the nucleopores. And then another thing that the nucleopores function for is that this is where the secret is. This is where the secret of why you might have hair on your big toe and why you may not. Well, that information had to get out of the nucleus to make that hair on your big toe. And so that secret is enclosed in the DNA and it's protected in this, safe called the nucleus. And what happens is that RNA will read the message, the secret that the DNA holds, and then RNA will take that message out of the nucleus through these nucleopores. And we'll learn more about what happens to that RNA and that message later on. But the nucleus isn't one big solid membrane. It does have these pores where RNA and ribosomes can move through. Okay, so we're going to watch a short video because these videos draw things and explain things with animations that there's no way that I could draw. And so you have these questions here, 1 through 5. You can write them down on notebook paper if you would like, or you have these extra pages at the end of each lesson that you do in each section of the lesson, and those are your note pages. So the purpose of those pages being blank is so that you can actually take your notes for that section of the lesson on those pages. Sorry, I had to rearrange.